So that's pretty much it. Okay, to the excerpt. So, any color, whichever color on its own, can only be selfish. But in harmonious or disruptive union with others, colors possess and excite the mind, heart, and all feelings. Color is most similar to the unison of souls in romance. The whites and blues and greens of my life thus far, and the myriad of tints and shades of the rainbow that had adorned the fabric of Zinat's past, soon came together in an ever-emerging beauty describable only by itself, yet visible to the curious eye. Mendos and the other boys knew it was out there, but they only teased me about it and did not bother sniffing out its evidence, except Maradona. When Pastor's son teased, Maradona laughed louder than everybody else, and then said something that always implied that Zinat was beyond me. Whenever she did come to the side of the field during our matches, he dwelled on the ball longer than he usually would, trying tricks he usually would not, even though he pulled them off most of the time. I did not mind because she cheered only when I was on the ball. Zinat had linked both our hearts. I seemed to be moving on to an eternal paradise with her while Maradona drifted towards damnation. We hoped fleeting. Maradona desperately began playing it off like she was barely an issue on his mind, paying less attention when she spoke. But I knew from the way he looked at her when he did look, and the way he spoke to her when he did speak, she remained an issue. It was the same way I looked at and spoke to her, which portrayed without reservations all of my feelings towards her. To be honest, I really never minded the boys teasing about Zinat and me, but it did get to me whenever Maradona became a third character in the joke. His name was like a serpentine presence lurking around the Garden of Eden Zinat and I had created for ourselves, a presence that had to be expelled. So I began trying to get the boys to stop, first cautiously and then curtly, via daily crescendo, until the day I snapped. The boys were laughing over something Pastor's son had said about making up a trophy called Zinat because all the boys seemed to play for her. I tried to interrupt with a loud shut up, but nobody seemed to notice. So I shouted again, an extended effort that was even more livid than the first. Somebody is burned because if he really had to play for her, he knows he'd never win, Maradona said, and everyone laughed louder. A few boys had started coming closer to find out if he was sharing chicken or something. Shut up, you're just stupid, I replied. He retorted, if I'm stupid, your mother is stupid. The crowd was growing, whispers were getting louder. I had to reply, but my lips were heavy and my eyes were heavier. The boys in the crowd noticed and started offering sticks and stones. Call his mother a shawo and call him a bastard. I was not sure what either of the words meant, so I cowered. Take it back, I forced out of my quivering lips. Take what back? We all looked towards Zinat, who was oblivious to the tension she felt. Before somebody could think up a lie, Pastor's son offered her the truth. Apparently, he was oblivious to the tension too. Maradona shoved him off his feet before he could continue. What about my little cigar, Zinat said. Little cigar? You... Hello. Okay. This is quintessential Nigeria. I know. Hello. What about my little cigar, Zinat said. Little cigar? You people already have stupid names for each other, just like husband and wife, Maradona quickly added. All the boys erupted in laughter, and perhaps a tear rolled down my face. I meant only to punch Maradona on his cheek like they did in the movies I watched with Zinat, but Pastor's son had stood up and reciprocated the shove he had received with even more vigor. Maradona staggered off balance. My punch to the cheek was miscalculated, and I felt my bony fist squish his eye. On days when I think about the moment, I can still taste the vomit that filled my mouth that day, as Maradona cried bloody tears until the street vendor had to come and rush him to a hospital. I was not allowed to go to the field for a week. During the time I would usually be playing football, I would stare out the window toward the dirt road that led to Mendo's house, but my mind barely wandered towards him or Zinat. It was my way of steeling myself for the barrage of slaps my father would dispense at the slightest irritation when he came home. It was also during this time that I tried to understand the news about Maradona, After a week of no results, I decided to talk about it with the boys in school, so I brought it up during our break time. What does the bastard mean? I asked. Mendes and Pastor's son were both present in the huddle we formed close to the swings, far away from where the other boys were. Maradona had still not returned to school. Our teacher had announced after assembly the day before that we should all take our time to pray for our classmate Maradona, who was recovering from eye surgery. There was silence for a while. It means when someone is really stupid, Pastor's son suggested. It's something different from that, I said. No, it's not. My mommy always says our driver is really stupid, or she calls him a bastard, so they can't be too different. A bastard is someone who doesn't know his father, Mendes said firmly. It's something different from that too, I replied. How would you know? Pastor's son inquired. Because Maradona's mother came to my house the day after he got injured. She said that Maradona needed surgery, that she did not have any money, and Maradona was a bastard, so my father would have to pay for it. So Mendes can't be right, because Maradona's father is a soldier. Everybody knows that. Maybe he would have paid for the surgery if he was around. Mendes said, maybe. Well, have any of you maybe seen Maradona's soldier father? Ever? I haven't, Pastor's son said. There was silence for a while. A bastard is someone who doesn't know his father, so Maradona probably lied. Mendes said with an air of finality, and he walked away.
Thank you. Safiya?
Okay, hello everyone. I started writing this book, Naja, about 6 years ago. And it's not my debut novel. I've written a book before. And the reason why I wrote about this, or I wrote about all the themes in Naja, is because I think we need to bring these conversations to the fore. You know, growing up, I grew up in Abuja, so these things that I write about are kind of strange even to me. I discovered this stuff, all those things going on about still people getting married at a very tender age, being forced into marriage and being forced to stay there, even though they are not being fed by the husbands. I discovered that it after I got married. And it didn't happen to me, but I had the opportunity of traveling to these places and witnessing and meeting these people, meeting these helpless, hopeless, and vulnerable women that just sit at home and don't know where the next meal is going to come from. And they are not empowered in any way. And anytime they try to do something for themselves, the husbands kind of feel a bit insecure that they will lose the power to hold these women to being submissive or obedient to them when they no longer look up to them to throw pittance at them to make a living. So I decided to write about these things and bring these conversations to the fore to tell us that even though we are in the 21st century, even though it is 2019, these things are still ongoing. The northern society, the larger part of the north, is you know, it has these things more than we have the educated, enlightened ones. So I think we should bring these conversations to the fore. That's why I wrote this book. Okay, Kinna, I'm going to break your rule because I'm not just going to read an excerpt. I'm going to read snippets from like 3 different places that touch my heart. Yes. Naja woke up at dawn and found half of her wrapper and the entire side of the mat on which Kamila lay, drenched in urine. It was with great effort she controlled her temper and resisted the urge to whack Kamila, who was still fast asleep. She would talk to her later to get to the bottom of this urine nonsense. Has she suddenly become a child? or was she afflicted by jinns? She did not bother to wake Kamila just then. Instead, she went to the well to draw water to wash her wrapper and herself before performing the Subhi prayer. She felt his presence behind her and wondered why he had not gone to the masjid already. Look what your stubbornness has cost your sister. Just look where it has landed her. If you had just let her be, all this would not have happened. If you had let her give birth at home, all this would not have happened. The bitterness in Baba's voice was unmistakable. Naja could not understand why Baba was blaming her for what had happened to Kamila. He blamed her for taking Kamila to the hospital. He blamed her for the loss of Kamila's baby, which to him was caused by the hospital. He blamed her for putting Kamila through the ordeal of being torn open like a salah ram. And now he was blaming her for this. She could not take it anymore. She would not be like Dada, who never uttered a word whenever Baba ranted. If she did not defend herself, he will succeed in making her siblings and mother believe that she was to be blamed for Kamila's misfortune. From the way Kamila shrank away when she tried to hug her the previous night and the way she refused to speak to her, it was clear that Baba's allegations were beginning to sink into Kamila's head. If I had not taken her to the hospital, she would have died, Baba, Naja had responded. She was surprised at how clear her voice was. How, unlike other times when she addressed him, she didn't fidget or stammer or speak in a voice barely above a whisper. Today, he did not yell at her for talking back at him. He did not curse her or whisper. Dying at home during labor would have been more honorable for her. At least she would have died a martyr. It would have been much better for her than this shameful disease caused by your so-called learned doctors who promised to save life but destroyed it instead. Now they have punctured her urine sac and she can no longer control it. It just oozes out all the time. So she has to live in impurity all her life. Thanks to you, Madam Erboko. So I'm going to read the second excerpt. It's just a paragraph. Naja did not see it coming until the day suddenly turned to a moonless night, accompanied by the peppery sting of the slap that landed across her face and blinded her. She was too shocked to cry. She reached out blindly and groped until she got hold of his kaftan. She heard him demand that she let go of his sleeve before the second slap landed on her cheek. She held onto his hand firmly and, with her eyes still closed, sank her teeth with all her might into his arm, pouring back the stings of both slaps. She did not care that his free hand had now unleashed a torrent of blows on her head, on her body. She did not care that the audience had now doubled, as evidenced in the numerous voices she now heard, some calling her name and asking her to stop, some cursing, some praying, and some just shrieking, adding to the noise. She felt two strong masculine hands tearing her away. Her fangs were glued to Malam Ilu's arm. She became sick and almost let go when she tasted blood, his blood. She heard him give in and let out a loud, wounded howl. Now the last term. It was a friend that introduced her to the fertility center in Abuja. You will spend money, but you will not regret it, she had said. It took a lot of persuasion to convince Chinedu to travel with her in search of a child in the fertility center. The riot broke out a few months after their visit to the center. On the morning, she started vomiting. It was a wonder that in spite of all the tension she had to go through then, the fetus had remained glued to the walls of her womb as they ran from Kano to her husband's village, where they stayed for a few months but had to leave when the mockery became unbearable. Chinedu could not stand the way his relatives offered comforting words of condolence while their eyes were filled with glee and mockery over his loss. Chinelo pretended not to hear the way conversations hushed when she approached. until one day her mother-in-law said, "Chinelo, your womb is like sandy soil that no crop will sprout from. Yet you refuse to let my son marry another wife, or even let a good girl bear my grandchildren. He doesn't have to marry her. You can both hold your positions. You bear his name while she bears the children that will bear his name and carry his lineage to the next generation. Biko, that is if you do not wish to kill him the way you have killed his riches. Now his pockets are as barren as your womb." Chinelo had bitten her lower lip in an effort to swallow the words which she wanted to hurl at her mother-in-law. She didn't need anyone to tell her that it would not be good for her to ask her mother-in-law if she was heartless, if she could not see what had just befallen them, if she did not hear how their shops were razed to the ground by angry mobs chanting Allahu Akbar, or if she was unaware of the way she wore hijab to conceal her Igbo identity to flee Kano alive. Instead, she chewed the words until she tasted blood on her lower lip. Thank you.
Thank you, both of you. My first question is to Safiya, and then Nnamdi, you can jump in. So I wanted to talk about your book. Fits in quite well with the conversations we've had over the past 2 days. In particular about family being, as I have said, a scene of crime. I would like you to talk about options, because Naja always feels and knows that she has options beyond what has been presented. And whether you think that is because of the education she got, or whether another woman not having had that little education would have felt she would have access to the same options.
I think Naja, even though she knew that she had those options, it's always a difficult situation, you know. Even in our everyday life, we know that we have options, but to take that bold step and grab the opportunities that we have and make our choices, it's always a very difficult thing to do. I think that's the same thing that happened to Naja.
Both of you, your characters suffer trauma in order to move on to make that change. I wanted you to discuss why, and is it necessary? Must we always go through trauma?
No, I don't think we always have to go through trauma, right? People evolve in different ways, but I think people evolve largely, not necessarily through trauma, but through events, right? Events could be something like as simple as a conversation, or it could be something as grand as the event in the book. But I think generally, like she said, right, we always have options, but we don't really grasp it, right? Most times we just like go in the tide of our comfort zones, like whatever everybody around us is doing, we just glide. And before like we make like changes that help us evolve or pivot into a certain direction, there's usually some sort of event, and that's pretty much what was reflected in the book.
I'm gonna take you a little bit to task.
No wahala.
In the book, there are two sisters. Are they twins? Two sisters.
Two sisters,
Yes. Oftentimes, when male writers want to show rebellion in women, you know, you make us into sex workers. I don't have any issue with sex work. Sex work is legitimate.
Yeah.
Work. It is. But why is it always the scene of women's rebellion? Can a woman who is not can a woman rebel and it wouldn't be in sex work?
I don't even think it was rebellion, right?
Then what was it?
It was just what it was. Like for example, I wouldn't even say because there were two sisters, right? But there was also Madame Messalina.
Mm-hmm.
But Madame Messalina wasn't really rebelling.
No, she's a madam. The sisters, why?
The sisters were. I feel one was,
yes,
and the other wasn't, right? I felt, I took it to Madame Messalina, right? Because she had a key role to play in the book. And with the first sister was going to be the link towards towards him getting into that line and feeding off Madame Messalina, right? And the second sister was exploring something else totally together. And when I wrote it, like I didn't. So when I was writing the second sister, I also didn't write that as rebellion. It was pretty much exploring the crisis of faith she had later.
Yeah.
Yes. So when I was writing the first sister, I wasn't writing it for her to be like a rebellious character, right? I wasn't trying to show some sort of resistance, because even as you look at it, like her parents were aware to an extent, but it didn't even really, it wasn't so much of an issue in the house, right? No one ever spoke about it. So I wouldn't say it was rebellion per se, or that wasn't the intention.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
It felt a bit like, Safiya, it felt a bit like rescuing, like you had manufactured a deus, a deus, the hand of God, to have, I don't want to give the story away, but to have Naja leave the way she left. Can you talk a bit about that? Because could it have happened any other way?
Well, I think right from the beginning, she never wanted to be there. And she had always had it at the back of her mind that she was going to leave. So, and when the opportunity presented itself, she just left. Yeah.
Okay. You want to add something?
Yeah. Just in addition, right, I would say, like I said, right, the more I talk about it, the more I understand, like, it comes from a very personal perspective. And when I say, like, I was exploring other things, like religion and blah, 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 I mean, it was also a point in my life where, like I said, I was disillusioned, so I was pretty much exploring everything, right? And everybody who knows me or follows me a little bit on social media or my writing will know, like, I'm a very, very, like, pro exploration and nightlife and liberalism. So yes, I did explore. Like, I did have, like, friends who were sex workers, right, where we would have conversations and, like, learn from them. And just pretty much, like, the same way, like, if you speak, I'll learn about you, your family, your son, like, the way you interact and your experiences, right? So I also had that. And to an extent, there was a bit of just, like, documenting that exploration as well.
Okay.
So that's probably what informed. Because, to be honest, they could really have been anything at all, right?
That's why I was asking why they were that.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair
Okay.
enough.
Both of you, your characters are young people and in Nigeria. And there's always this sense that we always have to understand the entirety of what our nations are about as Africans in order to, I suppose, survive. You know what I'm trying to say? I've only ever been a citizen of this continent, but I sometimes imagine that young people in other places where there is more protection, maybe a better, more function, a better functioning state, more freedoms, that young people do not have to face up to any reality of their country in order to endure. Do you see what I'm saying? I would like you both to discuss that, the extent to which they have to understand the lay of the land and how things function. Yours is a coming of age story, so already it's about that. But can you talk a little bit about the burden where our young people have to know how things are in order to navigate?
I relate to your question, right? Especially because after I wrote the book, I spent a year in Madrid and I lived there, right? And I would always say, like, I'm a very political person and blah, blah, blah. But I spent a year there and, like, I was about 10 months in before I knew who the president was or political parties. Like, I just didn't have to confront it, right? But, like, with Nigeria and probably, like, in most parts of Africa, like, when you talk about the mundane things, even in the regular mundane things, like, these things confront you whether or not you choose to engage it, right? Like, economic things, the economic problems of the country confront you, the political problems of the country confront you. And I wouldn't even say we understand it, because, to be honest, most of us really don't. I wouldn't say we all have a broad, like, understanding of things and how we work and how we should work in the systems, but we have to deal with it whether or not we understand it, and we have to confront it because it's in our face. right?
Well, regarding Naja, I don't think understanding the continent or the country has anything to do with Naja or most of my characters, because in the first place, they do not even know what is happening. They are in a box. The only relationship they have with politics is when politicians come just before the elections and they share stuff. That is the only relationship they have with politics. So all those ones are not their everyday realities. Their everyday reality is how or when or how to get the next meal, yeah? So politics really is not an issue here, yeah.
About silence in both your stories, about things that are not told or issues that are suppressed. Can you talk a little bit about that, starting with you, Safiya?
I think in northern Nigeria, that is the big thing. You know, when you're bold enough to come out and talk, the next thing is, I'll have to speak Hausa. You know, like you're not supposed to talk about these things. Before you are born, your life is already conditioned. As a female, this is what you're supposed to do. And it happens even in our homes. Like, I remember when my son was around, I think about 4 or 5, with his brother, I asked them why they were always outside. They should come back into the house. And they said, those kids told me that they are not women. Yes. They said, Muba mata bani. So women are meant to remain in the house, and they are meant to be outside at that young age. So you see, it's all this conditioning that does not allow you to speak up or to speak out. As a female, as a Fulani woman, even when you endure pain, you are not supposed to cry out. I am Fulani. If you are in the labor room and you are experiencing pain, your mother will say, please don't put me to shame. Shh, don't cry out. You have to suppress because you are so and so. You don't have the right to even express pain. Is that bad? So it's a big issue. And when you do not have the courage to speak up, there's no way you can heal. There is no healing. You need to speak up in order to heal. So it's one of the major issues here. And you can see even the silence does not just revolve around those people that are not educated. No. Of course, I don't want to give this story away, but you know, one of my very educated characters was not even bold enough to admit that she was, being abused. It was someone who had far less education that told her, look, you cannot just keep taking this. You have to do something about this. So you see, the courage to speak up really has very little to do with being educated. It's all about courage. It's all about making up our minds what we want and grabbing it.
Silence or unspoken things?
Silence and unspoken things. So, I mean, like on a very, very human level, right? In all like our relationships, father, son, like friend and friend, their expectations. And there's very, very, very often, right, expectations are assumed and people don't really communicate. And it just goes on like that. Like, I feel the biggest play on silence in the story is with Ehirim, the protagonist, and his dad, right? Where, I mean, the boy, I wouldn't even say he has expectations of his father, right? Because he's just like passively in the relationship. And his father never really has, his father definitely has expectations of him, but he never even really communicates it, right? And even as the relationship evolves, it shows. And when the relationship eventually devolves, where he just pretty much just disappears, that's also a huge play. And even at the point of disappearance, right, it was never still spoken about. Like with him or his mom, like there was never any resolution. It just happened and people were really passive, right? And I feel that's where the biggest issue comes with the passivity with which we go through our relationships. So we just assume and we expect, and there's just that passivity that comes along with it. And when he also goes to Enugu and he speaks with his aunt, that's a different type of relationship, right? Because she's very active, and as you would put it, she takes him to task on certain things. And even his cousins would challenge him, and he would say he's a certain type of person and he thinks a certain way, and they would challenge everything he does, right? So it pretty much contrasts the different ways. And I think for the most part of the book up until the very end, he's still a very, very passive person. And he still doesn't have set expectations out of all his relationships. And I wouldn't say he was manipulated, but he was pretty much a victim of his own life, right?
I want to jump in. I found it to be a good portrayal of vulnerability.
Fair.
And you've said that there's a lot of you in it.
Yes.
Is it that you have worked on being vulnerable, or is it that you are a writer? So, where does that come from as a male writer?
As a writer.
It's not what I'm saying is this a decision you made to be to make the character vulnerable? Are you yourself someone who pursues vulnerability as part of being a man? These are very personal questions.
Yeah. And
I feel it's in the book.
Yeah. I would say I'm a very vulnerable person, right? I don't think it was by any particular doing of mine, right? I think it was just the way I was brought up, right? I would say I'm the last of 4 children, right? So I think parents experiment, right? So it's I'm the, so when the iteration 1, iteration 2, iteration 3, and the 4th, right? I think part of the additional designs was we're going to make a very vulnerable man out of this child, right?
Good on the parents.
So yes, there was that. Okay. And I also had that phase of my life where I was really passive, right? But I also had a later phase where people pretty much held me accountable and questioned me and challenged me, right? And I mean, the vulnerability aided in my evolution in the sense that it didn't make me withdraw or get defensive. I didn't feel attacked. I could really, really reflect and choose what direction I wanted to grow in.
Thank you. So both of you deal with our lives have heavy themes, right? But you tell good stories. So in the sense that despite the heavy themes don't drag the story down, it doesn't become some kind of a thing on philosophy or ideology. So do you first set out to write good stories and then the themes come in, or do you say I'm going to cover these themes through these stories, through good storytelling?
Well, for me, writing is just something that comes from my soul, I really don't... I know this is what I want to write about in my head, but I never structure it. I've never in my life written a guide, or this is what I want in my chapter 1, like some sort of project. No, I just sit in front of my PC and I type and it comes, and that's it.
My mom always says that. There are writers come in many kinds. There are some who will just say, oh, I just sit. And if I can get a table, and my mom says that. Then there are other writers who go, wow, I can't write. I've never written in my, you know what I'm trying to say. She's one of those. It comes very easy to her. It's not all like that for people. Those of us that it's not like that. I'm here to represent you.
Representation. So for me, I deliberately do both, right? I really like a good story, but also good agendas, right? And good themes.
Yes.
And I deliberately pursue both. And as regards the method that she mentioned, I think I'm also a stark opposite, right? So I don't just for me, the sitting down part is the easiest part of the writing, right? So before the sitting down, there is the just studying and profiling and observing just from characters. And I'm the kind of person where we're having a conversation and my uncle in the room says something funny and I take notes. It could be a simple statement, it could be an argument, right? But when I'm writing, like I have the first draft is the draft of debate, right? So is lines of argument, lines of like just ideas, right? And the second draft is where I start and put like the flowery words and like all of the witty stuff. And it's pretty much like, when do you merge, right? Like, when is this idea and this debate relevant to the story, and when can this come in? But like, it's very, very deliberate to do both. I think, I think I'm really, really, really solid on both.
He's a student of old books.
Yes.
You've been reading some Flaubert or somebody. Yeah? Uh-huh.
Okay, to be honest, I have tried to be this writer that, that is very meticulous, very particular, I've tried to go back to look through what I have written and to do what he does, but it doesn't work for me. Like so once I just write, like, I don't even want to look at it again. I'd rather someone else does. It's like that.
I hear my 20 minutes questions. There are rules, so we shall not have long commentary. You will only ask questions, and you will not be asking about their next work, because they just released this book. So my rule is, when writers have released a new book, you shall not, like Abdul did to Tokwe yesterday, you shan't be asking, how are you working on your next book? The books just came out. We have to sit with them and live with them for a while. And so no questions like that. So questions. I will go with, where are the, I'm a feminist, so where are the women? Zara, no. Okay, I only see here. The mic. Oh.
Mm-hmm. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes.
It's been a very wonderful and insightful session. And the two writers really talk about what taught me writing itself. From Nnamdi's confession, he appears to have been exposed to reading much, much early. Now, it doesn't mean for the audience here that you have to start like Nnamdi to excel. Believe me, some of us, and I'm one, started reading much later, after secondary school perhaps. Obviously due to the reasons that didn't work for him, perhaps affluence, which made him to be able to read that early. Conversely, in my own case, was poverty, which didn't make me to go to school earlier. My people never went to school. So I went to school actually without knowing a word of English.
I love your comments, but you are taking long.
Thank you. Secondly, we want to talk about the spontaneity of writing, which works for Haja Safiya, and then the convoluted way of writing, which insists that Nnamdi takes. I actually believe that the excellent writer sets out to write a story. The themes find their way in. Sometimes he himself is shocked when he comes to realize, after he has done what he did, that actually he treated this theme without knowing that he treated it. So there is no harm, if you are an automaton like Safiya, to sometimes give way to research, so that credibility and verisimilitude will be seen in your work. Thank you.
I wanted to, since I'm the moderator, but I wanted to say that his point about he started reading much later, Nnamdi started reading much earlier, is the key thing is that you start reading. When we come, the problem, and it's not his fault, but when you find that a lot of young writers, it's because they've had the privilege of having books in their homes. And this is a problem always, because then it means that we have disintegrated our structures to make it possible for people who are coming from homes where there are no books. So this is always the thing when we use, you'll find that, in fact, you find a lot of people are using their personal circumstances to overcome where there should be structures, right? Okay, so you wait. Zara, you were the only woman, so keep it short. You are very welcome.
Actually, I have a comment and a question. Which one do you want me to start
The
first?
question first.
Yes, ma'am. Please, who is your tailor, Safiya? Your dress is so fine.
Yes.
Thank you.
And then the
Yes,
comment
yes.
is, your book is so amazing, and I just wanted to say thank you for writing this story, because the people who write these stories about us, they write us to fit a certain stereotype.
Yes.
And I was so proud. Like, I think I read Naja in a day. Like the day I got it, that's the day I read it. You wrote us in a way that we wanted to be written about.
Yes.
So thank you for writing about Northern women. Thank you for writing about Fulani women the way we want to be. We want to be seen by the world, not as some people are trying to drag us into their agenda. So I just wanted to say, on behalf of all the Fulani guests, thank you, Minyeti.
Thank you so much.
And I need your tailor's digits, you know.
Thank you, Fatima. So many men, I'm confused. You gentlemen over there, you were complaining about censorship. Not that I want to get in your good books, but you know, you can ask a question. He was like censorship yesterday.
You could.
And don't upset me.
Oh, so you know I'm capable of doing that. But I won't. Especially as you are the daughter of our great.
Good. Respect that one.
There is no sweetness here.
Yes. Oh,
Anyway, there's sweetness here.
good.
Quite frankly, I think that, my name is Chike Ofili. I think that what is enjoyable for me is the product of writing, not the process of it. I think the process of it is very agonizing, you know? And I want to ask Nnamdi, first of all, I see you as an overlapping poet, lapping into prose. You read so well, and there is a conscious, you know, there is craft, a conscious craft in what you, I've not read your book, but I've listened to you read. There's a conscious craft, even in the sentencing, you know, and I found that a little, you know, very, so I thought, were you first a poet that overlapped into a prose writer or a novelist, or are you caught in the middle? That is for you. And of course, Safiya, I had to, I am glad to see you read. I haven't missed you a couple of times. But I want to disagree with my sister here, who wants you to portray them as she would love to be portrayed. But I think the challenge, as they've always accused Achebe of, should be to portray things as they are. But we could also do what is called in advertising, getting the people to aspire to a certain product. So much as aspirational values can be entertained, we should not lie.
No, you may not, because I may exercise my feminist prerogative. I may get, in fact, answer the question.
Okay, Mr. Ofili, I just want to ask you, were you here when I read? So did you listen to the last excerpt that I read?
Yeah.
Please, what is it about? Is it about Naja, or is it about a certain Chinedu and Chinelo? I think that answers your question.
Oh, spicy. You.
Okay.
I want to say that when I was reading his book, and I don't want to, I'm rarely, I'm not a condescending, patronizing person. But I was reading some of the sentences, and I was thinking, the audacity of this young man to write these sentences. Like, explain yourself.
Okay. Firstly, now it's come back to my turn, right? Just like to Baba's comment, right? I understand like where it's coming from, and to reinforce what he said, I like to say, and like a lot of us who like, a lot of young guys like me, TJ, who writes, we always say like there really are no rules and guidelines to how and when to read and like to write and everything, and it's coming from a place of don't ever feel like we shouldn't ever feel like it's too late or certain structure. Like however you do, right? Like everything is valid. Like every every road to the market is valid as long as you end up at the market. So then to the question about poetry, actually no, like to be honest, have tried, right? But I've never hacked poetry. However, I do listen to a lot of rap, and I did write a lot. I started writing that, and I think, in fact, I've written an essay about this, right, where I say, like, I feel even beyond, like, what we define as literature, right, a lot of things that are very lyric-based also inform, like, how you could write, right? So also tying in back to There Are No Rules. So you can pretty much learn from everything, right? You can learn from the way people do praise and worship, like the rhythms with which they pace and everything, right? You can really, really learn from everything. So no, there was absolutely zero poetry in my personal history.
Okay, next question. I'm so biased. One of my favorite people, TJ Benson. I'm a very biased person, by the way.
Okay, so Nnamdi, you are a young writer.
What up?
Right.
I just want to say that while people have been salivating over the women's fashion, TJ Benson,
okay,
stand up. TJ Benson has been serving his own. So the men, a lot of you men have done very well with your dressing. But some of you need some, so
some
TJ. And the president of the fashion men writers, I suppose, would be Tolu down there, who is not here. But ask your question.
Can I continue? I'm taking your time. But I want to ask about your process as a young writer. There's this thing where they feel you have to get to 30, you have to be 35 years old before you do a book, right? If not, you'll not be taken seriously, or you're not yet in quote ready. So I want to ask how you navigated that and your process to getting published while in Nigeria. I understand your first publishers are in the US, and you have the new edition coming from Nigeria now. So your publishing process, how that was like for you? Because there are so many writers in the hall here. I would want to learn from you. Some of us are trying to get published now.
So I feel like I was very privileged to start writing in a bubble, right? So I didn't know any writers at all, and it was just like me and a couple of my friends in school who wrote, and we read our work. And so because of that, like a lot of what people regard as rules and best practices, I wasn't aware of them, so I didn't pay any attention to them, right? So most people would say like your first manuscript will always be shit and you never get published. I didn't have that mindset, right? Why? Like, why shouldn't you get published? And people would say, oh yes, you have to like have a certain number of submissions, like whether it's short stories, blah blah blah. Get an agent first. I don't have an agent. Get an MFA. Like there are a lot of channels. People say that this is the best practice, right? This is the well-trodden path, so you have to follow. But I didn't pay attention to any of that. So as regards like the process and the steps, it was pretty much just one audacious decision after the other. So firstly, I decided to write the book, which is the hardest part, right? Like making up your mind that I'm going to do a book one. And I did that. And yes, it was like publishing wasn't really an ambition. It would have been a nice to have, but it was like primarily I was writing it for like that circle. And the work was finished and everybody was like, yo, this is dope, try and get this published. I was bigged up, right? So I started submitting like to agents. I didn't get any feedback. I started submission directly to publishing houses as well. And I didn't get any feedback as well. So how it eventually got published was I had published a short story in a magazine in Catapult, and they have a publishing arm, right, a book publishing arm. So I hit up my editor. I'm like, yo, I have a manuscript and I want to get published. Like, how do we do this? And he told me, like, just send me the first 50 pages. I sent it, and he was like, I like this. And I'm not a decision maker as regards acquiring, but I'm going to push for this, right? So it was pretty much me not just paying attention to what everybody said I should be doing. So pretty much do what works for you. What I would say worked for me was focusing on the writing, actually having work. Like, put out short stories, put out essays. If you want to do a book, put out a manuscript, right? Because these little things maybe the capitalist side of me talking, right? But these little things build your brand. And there's the literary side of it, but you're also selling a brand in this thing. So focus on that as well, and focus on the actual work, and things will come together.
I will take my last set of questions. Sorry guys, there's a young woman. I know, I'll do better next time. She's at the back. Who has the mic?
Hi, my name is Kehinde, and my question is to Nnamdi. Nnamdi, before I started reading your book, I went to read about some of the interviews that you had granted, and there was a question that you had answered where you said that radical and violent revolution is valid. Yes. Although you said that in the face of radical and violent oppression as well, yes. But you also said that it was cool to represent in art. But in this country where we are now, we have a debate ongoing about what a revolution should look like and how do we achieve change. What do you think that in your book, you understand, writing about social justice, how do you think that you've approached the Nigerian situation, you understand, and our approach to revolution or revolutionizing change in our society?
So, as you said, right, I said radical and violent revolution is often, no, not often, is a valid response, right? It's not the only response, but it's a valid response to radical and violent oppression. And in representing these things in my book, so when the children, the three core people, Ihechi and Mendos and Pastor's son, like they all, and Maradona, right? They all grow apart, and everybody takes on like different ideologies, right? And one of them, Mendos, is very, very pro-revolution, let's burn down the country, right? And Ihechi is very pro-diplomacy, let's get in and change it from the inside. And Pastor's son is very let's pray our way out of this. And Maradona is self-interest, like I'll survive at whatever cost, and if the world burns, fine, as long as I survive and take care of myself and mine. So, and at the end, I don't think anybody really won, right? So it pretty much says, or what I was trying to represent is, each and every one of those parts are options, right? But I wouldn't say one is better than the other. Like, I'm not saying this is the one true solution, right? I'm saying these are the options we have, and these are the options we should take. Now, they're all pros and cons, and people like come from different places. Like, I wouldn't expect myself, who has like a certain degree of affluence, I'll probably be less radical than someone who is living like a do or die life, right? Just because of like my background, where I'm coming from, and the options available to me. But it will be very, very naive and privileged of me to say the people who choose to be radical and violent are being like one type of way, right? Because we don't have the same options, and we are facing the same things, but they're never really the same. So yeah.
Well, as a feminist, I'm in the middle of a fantastic revolution. These conversations we had here yesterday is a revolution. So it doesn't always have to be violent, but radical can come in many forms. One, and men, you've had the man in the second row.
Thank you very much. Thank you. This is for Mr. Nnamdi Ehirim, and it's quite personal. First, I heard you talk about your background, your civil engineering background, how you graduated from school with a degree in civil engineering, and you
barely.
Okay, and you started writing quite early. So I want to ask, give us a bit of your journey, just a bit of it. When did that point come in where you like, okay, this is the life, I want to live the writing life. This is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And just give us an idea of, okay, what moment did this light bulb come up?
Down. Please, what's your name? Stephen, Mr. Stephen. He has written down his questions, every single panel, and read them. So I just want to recognize how succinct his questions are. And he's been learning and studying a lot. So you get my award. You answer the question. This will be my last question because who can ask questions like that?
To be very transparent, right? Like I said, I started writing, like, I would say when I knew, like, oh, I'm good at this thing, right, is when in secondary school. Like, in secondary school, I would write English essays and I'll do well. And then people, boarding house now, people would say, fam, come and do my own for me now. And I'll do their own for them. And they will do well as well. And, like, my English teacher will come and meet me, like, I knew you wrote that because it's your style. But, like, it's all good, right? And he was the first person to call, maybe you should write a book. Like, you're actually good at this thing. So, like, that's when I knew I was good. But it was still always, like, a nice to do, right? A coping mechanism. To be very, very honest, like, I only decided this is something I can do forever. It was even after the book came out, and when all these invitations started coming in and saying, I'll fly you here and I'll fly you there. And I'm like, this is really, really nice, right? I can deal with this for the rest of my life.
Please give my two writers a round of applause. I'm going to sell you on the books. I expect them to be sold out. And the reason I love both books for different reasons. Hajiya Safiya's book, personally, me, Kinna, the works of African women writers is how I will get to freedom. So she has done the character of Naja, how she sees herself so completely and differently and bides her time and everything in that. And I agree with what you said. It's a fantastic book. And may we have more. And so I'm not going to ask you questions about your next book. But Nnamdi, to really amazing portrayal of young people coming of age in contemporary Nigeria. And there are other things going on in the book, lots of pop culture. It's a well-written book also. So please go and buy both. And there will be signing, because that's what we are here to do. Thank you for attending this book chat, even though some of you came late. But